Hello and welcome to this full for Dorico session. This is session 4. So today is about MusicXML import and playback. I will put a link in the chat as always to the session materials so you can download the file we want from there. Today what we'll be looking at, so here's the session materials page. When you're on this page, scroll down to session 4. If you've missed any of the previous sessions, then they're all here as well. So, for example, if you want to recap last week's session, session 3, there are some links here depending on whether you've been watching on Saturdays or Wednesdays, so you can click on that link. And the previous downloads are here. This week is session 4, so there's a finale MusicXML examples download here. The files I'll be using today, I thought maybe it was simplest if I used files you probably already have. So they are example files that were included with Finale 27, I think. They might have been in earlier versions as well, but they were in the worksheets and large ensembles, repertoire file and large ensembles. And so 3 of the files I've put in that zip file for you. So if you want to follow along with today's session, then those are the files we'll be using today. I'll be keeping an eye on the chat so I can see again we've got lots of people from all over the place. It's lovely to see you all from many countries this time as well. There's always some weather chat. It's not so bad here. It's a little bit grey, but it's not so bad here. Very wet in Valencia last week. Ask me any questions in the chat as we go. In fact, Chip's already said I had to miss last week's session. Is there a link for the notes? So yes, hopefully, if you just click on that link I've put in the chat, then there are links to these sessions. They're recorded, of course, available on exactly the same URL. So if you want to recap this session, no problem. If you just want to watch today, and then when you kind of come back to it and then look at the files and do it that way, you can do that as well. No problem at all. If you want to press pause at any time, and see what we're doing, no problem. But obviously, if you're watching live, then you'll be able to also comment in the chat and that kind of thing if you have any questions as we go. So I will be I'll try and keep an eye on those at the same time. I have run this session last Saturday as well, so this will be a recap, if you like, of that particular session, all of the same details. Maybe there's a couple of new things or something else I've thought of at the same time, but that's what the session's about. So you'll need Dorico, of course. I'm using Dorico 6.1, actually 6.1.10 today. There's a maintenance update this week, so if you haven't already got that, you can get that from the Steinberg download assistant. But actually today we need to start with Finale, really. So we need to, I'll show you how I've created the XML files first that I've put in that zip file. So from the session materials, these XML files, they're the XML files from the Finale files that were some of the demo files that were in there. So for example, the first one we're going to look at is this one, which is the Eine kleine Nachtmusik. So basically, when you're using Finale, this applies to lots of other programs, it's often in the file menu that there's an export option. So in this particular case, in Finale, it is file export. Sibelius also has very similar in the file section. There's an export option for MusicXML, and that's what we're looking at today. MusicXML is the best option for exporting from many programs. There's over 200 programs that can open and export MusicXML. So it's a very good way of transferring information. And it's a much more graphical option than, say, a MIDI file, for example, because things like the slurs that are in this file, the rehearsal marks, even the direction of the slurs, whether they're above or below the staff, any dynamics and where they are on the staff, all that kind of information is also available in the MusicXML file. It's a much more graphical format. If this was a MIDI file, the dynamics would be translated into MIDI velocities or MIDI CC messages, and then they'd have to be reinterpreted at the other end. Whereas if it's a MusicXML file, well, it doesn't necessarily have a lot of the playback information. It does have the graphical information, and then Dorico can use that to then give you the decent playback afterwards. So at the end of this session, we'll also look at how you would switch libraries. So if you wanted to switch the sounds, instead of the Dorico default sounds, you wanted to use the Finale sounds, for example, or GPO5 sounds, or Note Performance sounds, we'll look at some of those playback templates as well and how you would do that. So So what I've already done to give you this zip file is I've opened these files, and the first thing you should probably look at actually is in the export section here. There's a MusicXML section here, but there's also MusicXML preferences. So if you go to the preferences first, and make sure you have these sets of preferences. So you want to exporting the most recent version. If you've taken Make Music up on the offer for Dorico, then you also get the option of the latest version of Finale they did, so 27.4. So then you can export the latest version of MusicXML. So that will have more information in it than earlier versions would have. So make sure you're on that version. It's worth including the link parts in the files because although Dorico doesn't necessarily make use of those at the moment, there is the potential that you would want to make use of those at some point in the future, so it's worth adding them anyway. And also, as part of that, that's in the compressed files, so make sure you're also exporting compressed, not uncompressed. You can export uncompressed if you want to, but if you're doing it compressed, then you'll get a smaller file format in the end, so it takes up less space on your computer. But also it will include linked parts if you want them to, and also if there are any graphics in the file, then they're also more likely to be included in a compressed file, but they aren't included in the uncompressed file. So the recommendation from Michael Good, who did the MusicXML format when he was at Finale, or Make Music I should say, is to choose the compressed file format when you're exporting from Finale. So choose these options. You might want to maybe silence error messages, maybe. There's a translate folder option. So in the file menu, in export here, it's grayed out at the moment because I have this dialog open, but there's a translate folder to MusicXML, and what that will do is save you doing each file individually. So if you point that at a folder of files, it will then open each file, save it as MusicXML, close the file, open the next one, save it as MusicXML, and close. If there are any messages that pop up while it's doing that about, I don't know, a font change or something else, if you're not worried but you just want to export things as quickly as possible, then you might want to silence the error messages and potentially log those so that you've got a list of what they were. And the reason for that is just that when it's you don't want to be kind of set it going on a whole bunch of files or a folder of files, go and make a cup of tea or coffee, and then come back and find out actually you only got 2 files in, and then it asked you a question and you have to do something about it. So that might be a useful option depending on what your files are. So you can do, if I press OK on this sets the preferences, and then you can either use the export option for translate folder, and it will then work through a whole bunch of XML files for you and save them all as MusicXML with those options, or you can just use the XML option. So if you have a file open and you just want to export one file as MusicXML, then you can use this option and it will save that file out as a MusicXML file. I've done that for 3 files, and that's what we have here in this zip folder here. So if you want to download those, then we'll open those in Dorico. A question from Chip on the chat is saving as XML better than saving as PDF? It certainly is as far as Dorico is concerned, and as far as reworking things. I'd actually say potentially what I'd do really is export your Finale file as a PDF as well. The PDF file is very useful for printing because it's exactly what this looks like. So if you then, for some reason, can't open Finale in the future, you can still open the PDF and you can still print your file exactly as it looked when it was in Finale. But what you can't really do with the PDF very easily is edit it. There are some programs, like scanning programs, that will read a PDF. So things like, there's an app called PlayScore that you can download for your phone. There's another one called Newzik, Newzik, and a few others, and they will open a PDF. And then basically what they're doing is, like when they're scanning, it's doing an OCR, an optical character recognition, to recognise that it's music and turn that graphics back into music. It's more prone to errors because it's got to work out what's actually going on. With the XML format is actually a text-based format that literally describes the music. So it actually tells us what the note is, what the pitch is, how long it is, that it is a note, all of those kind of bits of information. Even things like the stem direction, the slur direction, that can all be described in the MusicXML file. So it's a much better format. I suppose I said graphical format kind of versus a MIDI file, but it's a much better format for transferring music if you want to be able to edit that music very easily and open it easily in another program. If you take PDF, that's useful for printing. but it would be more difficult, much more difficult, if you wanted to edit that file later. So I would actually say, if you have the option, really, you should do both. You should export your file as a PDF from Finale or whichever program you're working in, and a MusicXML file, and then you've got something you can print that was exactly the same, and you've got something you can then edit and rework. And I think really you're probably taking the MusicXML files into Dorico if you'll want to rewrite them. If you want them to be exactly the same and exactly the same look as you've got them in Finale, then the PDF would do that anyway. But if you want to rework them, if you want to, it's a composition you're adding to, you're rearranging something, you're adding different instruments, you're transposing things, then you want a MusicXML file. So hopefully that helps. Joanne says, is it better to do a single file at a time than a folder full of files? It doesn't really make any difference. Also, you don't need to open them all in Dorico, so you could use the folder option just so that you know you've got them all done as MusicXML. So I would potentially use the folder option and just have it work through all the files so that you know you've got them done, you know you've got them in another format for when you want to be able to edit them in the future. You don't necessarily need to open them in Dorico at that point, but you've got the MusicXML files you can use. If you're just working on individual files, or maybe if you don't have as many and you want to kind of open a file and check some things first, then before you close it, you might as well export it at that point and do a single file. So hopefully that helps with both of those questions. So let's open some of these in Dorico and have a look at them. And we can then also find out what are the kind of things that you might need to tweak or change. And so with these 3 example files I've picked, they kind of vary in size and complexity of the project, and there are different things in each file that are the kind of things that might crop up when you're opening your files. There might be some other similar things as well, but we can then have a look at how Dorico would handle some of these things. And it will also highlight probably some of the differences between any program really, in this case Finale, but between the way the program works. So the way it handles instruments, or the way it handles layouts, or the way it handles naming of things. If there's some slight differences, then we can look at those to see how we would handle those, how we would solve them, and that kind of thing. So this particular file, the Eine kleine Nachtmusik, I've already exported it. Like I said, you can download that from the page here, the session materials page. And now when you open Dorico, you can either click on Open or Import File in the bottom left from the hub here, or you can just go to File, Open, and you can choose to open a file. So we're going to start with this Eine kleine Nachtmusik, the Mozart file. So I'm going to press Open. And Dorico will open this, and it's opening it as a new project. So I'm not importing it into a template. There is a possibility that you might want to do that. As you're working through these, if you have several projects that you want a similar design, template, that kind of thing, and if you've worked through last week's session on layouts, and you've been doing things like setting up your composer and arranger details and that kind of thing, and what your page looks like and your title pages look like, and if from last week, if you've then set up your page templates here and maybe you've exported a template page set, you could import it into this project. But if you have already used the file save as project template, so if when you start in the Dorico hub, if you have a template here that you start from, then you might want to open that first. And then when you have the project open, you can go to File, Import the MusicXML into your current template. So that would be another way of doing it. But in this particular case, I've just done File, Open. So this is a blank project, effectively, that's opening as the MusicXML file. So there are some of the preferences that I have as my default preferences will then apply to this file. So for example, in my particular case, I've got the flow headers turned on here. So if I don't want those, if I'm not going to have multiple flows, then I'd want to turn those off. You might have a slightly different case if your template doesn't have these turned on, but you can easily turn these off. So if I go to the library menu and go to layout options, we were in there a lot last week for the session, then I can go to the flows section and I can turn off the show flow headings and set that to never. So I won't have flow headings in this project, so it's now gone. Now, while I'm in this section, the other things that might differ either between my system and yours, or when you're opening projects and what happens, is Dorico will read the information about the paper size out of the MusicXML file. So it knows the original Finale file was on letter size paper, It also knows the staff size. It's worked out the staff size from the original is currently 4.59 mil staff, which is actually quite small, really. So in this particular case, this is quite small. Now, there are a few other things that when it's importing, you might get slightly different results. So just going to take a step back just for a second to look at those as well, because that will also affect the layout, and when you start to change settings for staff size and that kind of thing, it will affect various things. So before you've opened the file, ideally, you want to go to the Dorico menu and Preferences. And I'll show you why, and then I'll show you why it would apply to this particular page as well. So in Preferences, or if you're on a Windows machine, then it's in the Edit menu, and Preferences will be at the bottom. But on a Mac, it's in the Dorico menu in Preferences. So in the Preferences section here, there is a specific section for MusicXML import. And this is important to understand at least what's going on when Dorico imports the file. So it's already done the import in this case, but we can now look at kind of some of the options that it used when it was importing the file. So in this particular case, I've unticked most of these options. So you see there's all sorts of options in here, and most of them are unticked except this one. So I'll just go through and explain why I've done that and whether you want to do that in your files or not. So if these boxes are ticked, so for example, these ones up here or any of the others, what it means is that when Dorico imports this file, it has the choice of either specifically importing the stem directions from the MusicXML file, or if you don't tick the box, then Dorico uses its own options. So in this particular case, I'm not going to choose any of these options, and that also applies for note durations and bin groups and lots of other things. And that's because if I want Dorico to apply the Dorico options for things, or the options that I've set in Dorico for things, then I don't want to tick these boxes, and Dorico will apply those options to the file as it opens it. If, however, you've worked on the file in Finale or any other program, and you have specifically set some stem directions because you needed to set some voices, or layers they would be in Finale, in a particular direction to make the look that you needed. If you'd specifically specified some note durations, maybe in particular ones that weren't normally following that meter. So when we've looked at some things in Dorico, we've looked at things like forced duration, and we've looked at how we'd change note grouping and that kind of thing. If you've done that in Finale and you specifically want to import those options that you've set, then do tick the box, and Dorico effectively will use forced duration when it imports those notes so that they're exactly the same as the file. If you haven't particularly worked on them and you don't necessarily know whether it was the note groupings were correct or the note durations were correct in the meter you're in, then don't tick the box and Dorico will apply its own options. You can have Dorico change some of these things afterwards. So if you tick the box, imported it, and it's not correct, you can often right-click and reset the layouts. You can reset the look of things. You can reset things like the beam grouping and that kind of thing as well. So if you were, for example, you've written something in Finale that was in 6/8, but you specifically wanted it to a few bars to look like 3/4, then you would want to tick the beam grouping or the note grouping, depending on how you'd done it, so that you would import those options. So I'm not going to import those particular ones at this point, because then it means I'm using the Dorico options. And while that potentially may differ, I'm not sure in most of the cases it does differ in these files, but while it potentially may differ, it means I can then use the Dorico options. Because if you've specified some of these, and then you try and use the Dorico options, then the forced durations and other options will override those settings, and you might get a bit confused about why some of the Dorico settings aren't working. So just be aware, if you've ticked these boxes, you've applied more manual options that you need to be aware of when you're working on the project. If you don't tick the boxes, Dorico will use its own options, but again, be aware that that's what it's doing. So the same applies for articulation placement or accidental visibility, tuplet brackets and that kind of thing. If you've got lots of tuplets, do you want them all to appear or not? The same kind of things can appear for rests. So if you put particular rest groupings in, or rest lengths, durations, that kind of thing, then you might want to have imported those. Dynamic placement, various other things here. Slur direction. I've seen some files import and the slurs have been upside down, and it was simply because the slurs were quickly added in another program with no particular thought to whether they were in the right direction or not, up or above or below the staff. So if you don't tick the box, Dorico will sort those out on the import, no problem. If you do tick the box, you'll get the options out of the file. Now, the one I do use is text items, because if there's any ambiguity in the file about what something is, then it will get imported as a text item. So, for example, if something like a Cresc text or some other text that it couldn't quite define wasn't properly defined, at least if I tick text items, at the very worst case, I'll get it twice. I'll get it once as the actual item that it is, and Dorico might import it as a text item as well, and then I can simply delete one of them. But at least that highlights that it was there, that I might need to check that option and that kind of thing. If I don't tick it, then there's a possibility that Dorico won't import something, because if it doesn't know what it is, then it won't import it at all, and then you're more likely to miss something that from the file. So I tend to leave that one ticked myself. I also tend to import the font style information, so I have a rough idea of what it was supposed to look like in most cases. I would probably then set a paragraph style for that, and we'll look at some of those options as well. But yes, I would tend to leave those two ticked. The other ones that sometimes people do tick, and you see there's a few various other ones in here, is this one for import system and frame breaks. Now, what this will do is, because Dorico is importing the page size, it also will then, if you import the system and frame breaks, it will put exactly the same number of bars, systems. Frame breaks are basically page breaks, as we looked at last week. So you'll get exactly the same information on every page. And so if you want something to look as much as possible like the original finale file with all those page breaks, then you might want to tick that box. However, if you're importing something and then you're instantly going to change either the staff size or the paper size, or you're going to add some new instruments to it because you're doing an arrangement of something and you want to add new instruments, you don't want to import this, because you're instantly going to be changing the look and feel of the project anyway. So in this particular case, I'm not going to tick the box, because I don't want to kind of import some of that information. Now, if you do tick the box and you find actually you don't want those things, in fact, let me just tick the box again. Let's open the file with the other option on. You can see the difference then. So I'll just close this file and we'll open it again with that option ticked, because you can then see the option and how we would deal with it. So when I go to File Open, choose the same file and press Open, I now have that extra box ticked in the preferences. So now I have these frame breaks and system breaks. If they're not showing on your system, then you can go to the View menu and you can go to Signposts, and there's options to turn on various signposts, but there's also Hide and Show signposts here. I use it a lot, so I've set myself a shortcut for that one. But you can see I have frame breaks and system breaks. So now I have exactly the same number of bars per system, and I've got the same frame breaks or page breaks as I would have had in the original file. So Dorico's made everything fit exactly the same as it would have in the original finale file. But, like I said, if I'm now about to change the paper size or the staff size or anything else, then it's going to make a mess. So when I go to Layout Options in the Library menu, this is imported as letter size paper because that's what the original file was in, but I'm going to generally use A4 because that's what I would print internationally. So if I choose A4 and I want to go back to a standard staff size of 7mm because I've decided 4.5 is a bit small, then 7 is our default normally. So if I press Apply and Close, then I get this, because all the frame breaks and system breaks are now still applying. So it's trying to fit all the same music on there, but with a bigger staff size. So this isn't going to fit. So what I would then do is in Engrave mode, you just go to the Engrave menu, and basically we want to delete all these breaks, but we want to do it in a quick way. So you can choose each individual break and delete it, but it's much quicker to go to Format Music Frames and go to Reset Layout, and that will remove all of those system and frame breaks. So then now I've got all the same music, and actually this staff size is probably a bit big actually, but at least now I can reformat it using the Dorico options without applying those other options. And as I said, the same would probably apply if you added new instruments. So this is obviously for strings. If you were writing a woodwind version, then as soon as you added more instruments to this file in setup mode, you would have the same problem where the music didn't fit on the page. So I would generally, if you're doing rearrangement type stuff, I would recommend not ticking this import system and frame breaks option in the preferences, because then you don't have to do that extra step of resetting the layout. I'm going to drop the staff size down a little bit. Let's try 6.5 or maybe 6. There we go. You can see the music reformatting. Now, there's a few other problems with this project, so let's look at some of these as well. Let me just check, actually. Are there any questions? Yes, there is one. Is there a way to leave the signposts while working but not see them on the printed music? Yes, you can. So the signposts, you can show and hide them anyway in the View menu, but they will still apply, but they're only applying to page view. So if you want to work on the music, you could go to Galley View, and then it just gives you one long continuous stream of music, and even if there are signposts, they won't apply, they won't change things. So you could, I suppose, if you're doing an arrangement and adding woodwinds, for example, you could go to setup mode now, you could add your woodwinds, it wouldn't affect anything layout-wise because you're using Galley View, it's like Scroll View, or like Panorama. And so you could work on everything in this view, and then when you've finished, you might then, I don't know, delete the original stringed instruments, for example. When you go back to page view, if you only had 4 instruments, actually the page breaks and frame breaks might work for you at that point. So yes, you could, but I'm not sure. And I think I would probably still, if I'm changing other things anyway, especially in my case where I'm changing paper size as well, then I wouldn't bother with the breaks. So I'm just going to turn off that flow header again as I did before. So layout options, and I'm going to go to here to turn that off. I'm using the shortcut for layout options. It is in the library menu, layout options if you want it, but there's a shortcut here, Command-Shift-L or Control-Shift-L if you're on Windows. Now the other problems that we've got, I think, to start off with in this file, and I'm just going to check a few notes to make sure I don't miss anything else that I was talking about here. So in this one, yeah, there's a couple of things. I mean, to start off with, we've got the full instrument names on every staff. We've also got a very large margin on the left here. So there's a couple of things at play here. One is that Finale handled page margins and staff labels a bit differently to Dorico, in that it kind of put the page margin in, and kind of included the staff label kind of in it, if you like. So in a similar Dorico way, if you go to layout options, there is an option for this. In the staves and systems, when you're talking about which staff labels we're using, there is an option to position the staff labels outside the music frame. So if I do that and press apply, then you'll see you now get this, which is probably a little bit more like the look that the Finale file had. So you could potentially use that option to just put them outside the music frame. By the music frame, if I just move this out of the way for a second, what we mean by that is in engrave mode, we've got the, if you remember from last week, we've got these page margins here. And you see they're the grey areas. So there's a box basically runs around here, so all the page fits inside that grey box. Then we have these green boxes for text, and we have a blue music frame here. So this here, this blue frame here, is the music frame. So you can see now the staff labels are outside that music frame, and that's why in Finale they've given a much bigger page margin on the left than they have the right to accommodate those labels that have been added. Actually, commonly what we would do in Dorico probably is keep the staff labels inside the music frame. You have the option, but we would normally do it this way. But we would also have consistent margins, so we would probably, in our default templates, would have the same page margins here. So this would also be 15.82. So no, it wouldn't. It would be 12.72, sorry. Apologies. I read the wrong details there. That's the top and bottom margin. This is left and right. So we would normally have left and right be the same type of, the same size margin. So we would normally do this, and when you're in right view, right mode, then this would be the look we would normally do. And you can see then we're still inside the music frame, but we've got a less of a margin here. So we've got consistent margins both sides, and then we put the labels in. So your choice which way you want to do it, but this is the Dorico standard way of doing it. So you can see how you would change that if you wanted to. Now also you've got the staff labels here, but you've also got full staff labels on every staff. And there's an interesting quirk with this file. In the original Finale file here, you can see they've got staff labels on at the beginning, but then they'd actually turn them off everywhere else and they didn't have any labels at all. So they effectively had the layout option here for staves and systems for staff labels to be full and then none. So if we do that and say apply, then actually this was what we had. It was the full labels here and then no labels at all everywhere else. But the interesting quirk in this file, if I put them back to abbreviated, is that that's not the abbreviated label. So if you want to change your staff labels, and you may want to do this, and we'll look at a couple of options for this in each file for the staff labels. If you're in Dorico 6, you can just double click on a staff label and it will open the editor for the edit instrument names. If you're on Dorico 5 or earlier, then you'd need to go to setup mode, and then you can expand the player here to find the instrument, click on the 3 dots for that instrument, and then you can go to edit names. And that opens the same dialog. But what you can see in here is we've got the full name here, and then we've got the short name is blank. So what Dorico was actually doing is it was saying, well, you've only given me a full name, so when you want a short name, I'll just use the full name again because I don't have anything else. So you could type in all of the short names into here if you wanted to, or into each instrument. And if you're on Dorico 6, that's a bit quicker because you can just double click on each instrument here, add the short name, and change each of these. So you could do that if you wanted to, and then you'd have the short names if you wanted them on the other staves. There is another option you could use, which is in setup mode here. When you go to the setup menu, there's an option for reset instrument names. So if I choose this, then it will reset the short and the full instrument names. You can see this was a cello/bass, and it now just says it's violoncello because it's reset it back to the bass instrument. So you could still double click on this and edit the name if you wanted to, but that now you're only having to edit one rather than edit all of them. And obviously if you've got a lot of instruments in the file, that might be a quicker way of resetting lots of instrument names. But we will look at that in a couple of other cases as well, because sometimes there's reasons why you wouldn't want to do that for a reset, but sometimes in this particular case it's potentially a useful thing to do. And then you can choose whether you want to show the short names or not anyway in the layout options. A couple of other things that in this particular file. So when we move across here, you can see it did import the rehearsal markings, and it's also imported the style, which was to put them in a circle. And then down here, there's a Kresk that's been imported. So you can see the Kresk is just text sitting above up here, and all of these are actually sitting above the staff, but the dynamics are below. So you can see that the dynamics, and when they're all attached to the staff, are below, but this one isn't. So the reason for this is that in this particular file, at least, and I don't know how standard that was in Finale, but in this particular case, this is expression text. It's not actually defined as a dynamic. So because it was put in as expression text in Finale, when Finale's exported it, it's exported it as a bit of text to do with expression, but it's not actually a dynamic, and we would normally put these in as a dynamic in Dorico. You can also tell this because in the bottom of the screen down here, it just says it's staff attached text and tells you the style that it's using down here. If you click on a dynamic, for example, then it would tell you it's a dynamic, so it knows that that's a different option. And a crescendo in Dorico could be a hairpin, it could be text, and you can switch between them, but in this particular case, this is just a bit of text. So if you double click on it, you can edit it as a bit of text. Now you could choose these, you could choose all of these if you wanted to. I'm just holding down Command or Control on Windows, and you could just press F and you could flip them the other side. But it might not be quite the style you wanted for these bits of text either. So actually I would probably delete these, and I'd select these notes here, and when you use Shift-D, just retype Kresk, because then you get it with the right font, the right size, and it is actually also a dynamic. So now it says dynamic down here, and in the properties panel you could change this to be a hairpin if you wanted to, or keep it as the Kresk text that you used. So in some cases like that, there are things that will import and just come in as text instead of actually the option that you wanted them to be. Also, when you import scores, you're importing just the score. So while Dorico has then made all of the parts for these, the parts are not using the layouts that you would have had in Finale. So if you have spent any time on that kind of side of things, just understand that the Dorico version, it's redone the layout for all of these. They're new layouts. So they potentially will need checking to make sure, for example, you could probably get this onto 4 pages, not 5, that kind of thing. You might want to tweak some of those things to make sure that they match. So in my particular case, if I go to layout options again, while the score originally imported onto letter size paper, because all the parts are remade, all of these are automatically showing on A4 paper because that's the default on my system. So if you're in the US and your defaults are letter and tabloid size paper, then you would get those for all of your new parts as well. And so this has also reset these to the standard 7mm staff size because that's the standard on my machine. If I change some of the parts and press save as default, then I could potentially have saved other part options that would then be used when those parts were created. But these are all new parts that have been created. They should generally look very nice. You should generally have to do probably very little editing. There might be some things to do with layouts that you want to tweak or change, put some page breaks, that kind of thing. And like I said, I think with this one we could make it fit on lesser pages. I think probably if we just changed, for example, the either the staff size down a little bit or the note spacing that we looked at last week, I think either of those would probably do it to reduce it down. So, for example, if we take volume 1 and we said we wanted, I think the sizes, if you wanted them even from Finale, it was a 1.59mm staff size that they'd used in their version, and the note spacing would be something like, I think it was 3 3/8, I think. So if we did that and pressed apply and close, there you go, we're now onto 3 pages, and this would be more like the look that you had in the original Finale file if you wanted to quickly apply those kind of similar settings for that layout. So those kind of things, and we looked at lots of layout things last week about how you can change all of those. Maybe there's other templates that you want to use and that kind of thing. So, but you should be able to very quickly then make the the score and parts work for what you need. So you can do you can rearrange it or do whatever it is you need from there. Let me just check in the chat. Hang on a second. Where do we get to? Sorry, I think I've missed a question. There's a question about fonts. I will look at fonts in the next file if that's okay. We know I did that one. Sorry. There's one more advanced instruction about combining voices. Yes, potentially. There are some things we might want to look at, and some of the other files as well, about kind of splitting out instruments and that kind of thing. So maybe we'll need to do another masterclass on that kind of thing at some point. I'm not sure what you mean about copy strings and tuning import independently. Let me know what you mean about that one, Catherine. How do I ask Dorico not to print my helpful signposts on my sheet music? The signposts, if you had signposts, so for example, let me just add one for a second. The signposts we were talking about in particular there were things like these frame breaks. This made no difference because I added it at the beginning of a frame anyway. So these frame breaks, they won't print anyway. So these items will not print. In print mode, you see, you won't see, where was it? Page 2, I think. So you won't see them anyway in the print preview. There are some options down here to print view options if you really, really wanted to. Then it would print a frame break, but you have to specifically ask it to print those options, and generally you wouldn't. So that's not normally on by default. So by default, these frame breaks, which I'm going to press delete anyway, but they wouldn't print anyway. Stephen says, presumably if crescendo cresc is text, then there's no getting louder. Exactly, yes. So that text that we had here when it was imported here, it wouldn't have affected any of the dynamics. When it was just text above the staff, it wouldn't have affected any of the dynamics either. But actually deleting it and making it the right style and everything else, adding it again in that way, means that yes, it will also now affect playback. There's a question about a particular chord and importing that. It will depend on the chord and what the options you have set. So when you import that chord, we know what the chord is, and it will depend on the settings that you've got in either the library engraving options for chord symbols, or if you've got a bespoke chord library that you've made. In fact, there's another live stream we could do is on chord libraries. So maybe send us a particular example. We can have a look at that if you've got something that's not importing the right way, or it might be just that we can quickly edit it in when it gets to the Dorico anyway. But yes, if there are particular chord symbols, then they will generally use the library options to display those chord symbols, so you can easily tweak them, but you can set up your own chord libraries as well. Catherine says there's 3 options in the down arrow advanced. Combining voices, copy strings and tuning, and import independently. Combining voices is highlighted. Was this in the import preferences? I think, are we talking about these ones here? Or is it these ones? These ones. So this is if it's notation and tablature. So if you have if you've got guitar, notation and tab, then there are, because in Dorico normally you'd add one guitar, or one guitar player, one guitar instrument, and you can then get it to display in notation or tab, or you can have it display both. What this is saying is when you've got notation and tab done as 2 separate players in the MusicXML file, do you want it to combine those into one single guitarist, one single guitar player, and do you want it to copy the strings and tuning, or do you want to import them as 2 independent instruments? So it depends which options you want there, but that's a specific option when you're importing music, which is written for guitar and guitar tab if you want to use those ones. There's also a question about chord symbols. Can we do a live stream on chord symbols? Yes, potentially we can do that. Actually, my colleague Marcus is going to do one, but it'll be in German. So yes, maybe we should do an English version of that one as well. Although a little while after we've done all of the live streams, you can also watch them in your own language. So YouTube will now translate them, but it does take a few days after a live stream before it does all of that. But yes, and please do send me a file with the Sharp 11 question, and we can carry on that bit. So that was the first file here. I don't think there was too much else in this particular file. I think we'll move on to the next one if that's okay, and look at some other options in that one instead. So I'll go to File, Open again. So I'm going to start another new project, not importing it into this project, another new project, and going to go for the Beethoven Polonaise this time. So we'll open this file, and then we'll just make this full screen. So again, on my system, I have imported this and I've got flow headers again. So that's again because I've got the default settings on my computer. So I will very quickly just turn that one off so that I don't have flow headers, because I don't want those in this particular case. I've got signposts still turned on, so that's why it's showing me the signposts over here. I can just turn signposts off with my shortcut, or they're in view signposts, and you can use the hide signposts option. At the top up here, Tempo de Polonaise, this is where one of the text options, it wasn't sure exactly what all of this text was. So this is just imported as staff attached text, and this is obviously an immediate tempo. So really what you want to do is copy this text out of here, and you can delete this then because you don't need that one. In the tempo marking, in the properties panel, you can add in the other text here, and so it will then all apply as the correct tempo marking at that point. So if anything kind of goes awry with those, you can change those. Also in this particular file, we've got this option here, which is displaying because it was showing the tempo in 2 different places. So I'm going to delete this one because this is now staff attached text attached to the trumpet, which isn't what we want. So I'm just going to delete that one. But also, if we want to get tempos to display in different places, what you also might find, or at least I have on my system, is that this is all imported with one big bracket here, which isn't what I want. And that will be because, at least on my system, the default in library layout options for brackets and braces is to use small ensemble. So it's grouping everybody into the same bracket. And for this piece, actually, we just want orchestral. So if you just choose that option and press apply, then you'll see that now we've got the correct bracketing for the orchestral setting that we want here. The instrument order is different, and that's because it's what has come out of the original file from Finale. So flute, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 2 clarinets, then trumpet, then the horns. So this particular, the instrumentation order has come directly out of the MusicXML file. You could change that if you wanted to. So now you're in Dorico. In setup mode, there are options down here for sorting the players. There's a button here for sorting them, and if you right click on it, you can choose, for example, jazz, band, orchestral, or none. And so if you wanted to sort an orchestral, you just press that button with it set to orchestral, and it would change the order of instruments. Because it is set to orchestral already, if you start adding or changing instruments in here, then it will also resort them into the orchestral order, because adding new instruments means it will then resort everybody. So if you don't want that to happen, if you want to keep this particular set and this particular order of instruments, then you want to right click on this button and set it to none, so that then it won't do any automatic sorting of the instruments if that's the order you want them in. So now we also, if we want to put this tempo above this this bracket in here, now we've got some space, then you can do that. It's also library layout options, and it's in the staves and systems for system attached items, and you can just say show system attached items above, and you can pick a family. So you can just say brass here, and then we've got the tempo marking in there as well. If you've got other things that you want to display in particular places, so for example in this piece here there's a first and second time bracket over here. And in the original Finale file here, the tempo is shown here, but the brackets for the first and second time repeats are only shown at the top. So if you wanted that exact option, in Dorico 6, and this isn't available in Dorico 5 actually, but in Dorico 6 you can choose specific players, and you can now say that you want tempos to be, for example, above the flute, and in this case the trumpet, but the repeats you only want to be shown at the top. So all of the repeat options, these bar lines. So if I now press apply and close, then I'll still have my tempos shown here and here, but I've only got the brackets at the top up here, and I don't have them above the brass over here. So if those are the kind of options you want, they're all layout options for what's going on there. Also at the beginning of this file, if I open this one, this is the original. It says Polonaise for Militar Music, and it also has Beethoven's details and an arranger in here as well. So these details, it really depends on the XML file. It turns out that in this particular file, and in fact the previous one, the information wasn't put into the MusicXML file. So however that had been added in the Finale file, it wasn't actually added as an official composer and arranger information. So the next file we look at actually does have that information, so you'll see a difference. But in that one, when I go to File Project Info, if the file existed in the MusicXML file as a composer or as an arranger, then it would have been imported into here. You see it says Composer Arranger. So the first file we looked at, oh sorry, I've got these the wrong way, haven't I? Let me just check, sorry. Sorry, this was not put in as a composer. That was the problem. It was the Mozart one. The Polonaise, it has been put in as the composer, but it's not showing up here. That's right. So the reason for this one is that we've got the project information here, and that's what we're showing. It says Project Composer. If you're on Dorico 5, you don't see this grey text here when it's a blank field, but in Dorico 6 you do. It will still show up when you put the composer information in there. So what you do is you go to File Project Info, this dialog here. The information is in the flow information, but it's not in the project information. So with the project information chosen, you can go down the bottom and you can say copy the info from, and it will copy it from Polonaise, which is the flow. So if I just press copy, it copies all the information in, the composer, the arranger, and the copyright details. So now it all exists as project information rather than flow information. I can press apply and close, and now it's given me the Beethoven composer up here, and it would also give me the copyright details at the bottom. However, the copyright details have been cut off, as you can see here, and the arranger is not applying here. So as you'll know from last week, when we looked at layouts and we looked at page templates, what you would need to do in this one is in engrave mode, you'd need to double click on your first page template. You would need to add the arranger field, the project arranger field, into here, make the box a bit bigger, and you'd also need to make this copyright box a bit bigger. So for example, if I bump this one up a size or two, let's just move the bottom of that as well. Copy it from left to right, press apply and close, and then I would now have more information for the copyright details at the bottom. So that's something really is from last week, the details from that one. So if you want more details on that, then recap the layouts session that we did last week. But that's why you might get different information or no information appearing at the top. It's either, to start off with, because in project info your details will all have been imported as the flow information, so you need to copy them using this copy button to the project information, and then you need to make sure that the right fields are appearing in the right places, and that they're the right size to make all the information fit. We've also got the same layout issues here with the page margins. So I'm going to go back into here for page setup. I'm going to set my page margins to be the same, 12.75 this time, so that they're the same both sides, so that we've now got all of the labels here. Now also with these labels, it depends on the instruments how you want all of these labels to show up. So in the original file here, we've got the bassoon 1, bassoon 2, clarinet in B flat, so the transposition is mentioned here, and trumpet in B flat and horn in F. But then here we don't have the instrumentation shown with the same transposition options. So this is actually a bit of a problem. In Dorico, we are generally consistent either way. So the B-flat clarinets here have the transposition, and the horns don't have any transposition, but they do have transposition here. So I'll show you the options that we have in Dorico and how we would solve some of these. So when you go to the we can be in write mode, it doesn't matter. When we go to library layout options, you can see for the staves and systems, for the staff labels, we've got the full and abbreviated names, which is correct. Full names here, abbreviated names here. And then underneath down here, we've got pitch and transposition section. So you can show the pitch or transposition in the staff full labels or the abbreviated labels. And you can also position the pitch in the staff labels at the start or the end. So the difference there would be, if I press apply, we've got clarinet in B flat, and if I say start, then we've got B flat clarinets. Now the problem is there's only one of these options. And in actual fact, they want to show end for these ones, and they want to show start for clarinet, but only for clarinets and not for horns. So what I would probably do in this case is find the option that's going to solve most of them. So full in this case, not abbreviated, and end. And then if you need to tweak any of these manually, you can either in Dorico 6 double click on the staff label, or in Dorico 5 do it from setup mode. And you can add in the instrument, the transposition here if you needed to. So you could say actually always show the transposition here, for example, if you needed to override completely, follow the layout options, but you can manually type it into here as well. So if you wanted to do that, you could type things in there if you wanted to change that particular label to be the same. But now in my case, I've turned all of the transposition off for this one and left them on for this side for the instruments that need it. Let me just also check a couple of other things. So I think in this one, are there any rehearsal marks? We talked about the repeat options. Otherwise, I think things are generally looking okay in this one. The writ at the end has been imported as a system line, so it will apply to all of the parts and is therefore showing here as well. In the original, I think they'd had a little writ shown underneath all of the instruments, which was maybe a little bit strange or non-standard maybe. Another option actually that you need to be aware of when you're importing music is, of course, the original project here. It will look different. And for example, these labels are different, but it will look different at the beginning because this was a transposed score. Just be aware when you import music as MusicXML into Dorico, it will generally be in concert pitch. So just behind my head, down here in the bottom corner, there's a concert pitch and transposed pitch option. So make sure you're on transposed pitch if you want to see your instruments transposed. By default in Dorico, we tend to leave the scores in concert pitch and the parts are all transposed so that you can't accidentally print a part that's not transposed. but we don't. But it depends on the style of the music as to whether you want the score to be in concert pitch or transpose pitch. So make sure you choose that option. It also exists in the edit menu. So there's a concert pitch, transpose pitch toggle here. There are some shortcuts for that as well if you want it. But that would also, of course, affect the look of the beginning of this file as to how that information would show. These bits of text down here for the bass drum and the snare drum, also they've been imported as staff attached text, but it's then defaulted to being above the staff. So you might want to press F to flip one of those underneath. You'll see also it can affect the spacing, and we looked at the spacing, and we looked at the in engrave mode, the avoid collisions option that we used last week. But in this particular case, all you probably do is press F to flip it underneath the staff, and then if you wanted to move it in somewhere else, you could use engrave mode, and you could move these over if you wanted those to appear more where they were before. Now with the things like this again is just an individual bit of text. So it's not actually one of our official labels or necessarily the right size that you wanted. Also, if you wanted things like your tempos to be a different size or style to match, then those kind of things are all, the font style information that you might want to look at. There's similarly with the music, actually. Somebody asked earlier in the chat about the look and the fonts of things. So let's look at music fonts and text fonts and how we do those. I'm just checking. It's behind you. The sort is behind your head. Sorry. When I did the sort options in setup mode earlier, they were behind my head. So yes, let me just put my little notification thing, which is a bit of sticky plastic that I stick on the screen to remind me that you can't see the same options. There we go. So behind my head in setup mode, just to recap, there are some buttons down here for sort. So this is your sort button. When we were sorting the instruments into a particular order, and you right click on this button, this one here, and then you can choose non or jazz or orchestral, and when you click on the button it would then do the sort if you'd set it, for example, to orchestral. So sorry about that, it was behind my head. Maybe I should turn me off. Maybe you don't need to see me at all, but I don't know. Is there a setting to show the player's key instead of all concert pitch? We've just done that one, so that's good. So Dennis, you asked at the right time. How do you move the composer arranger further away from the top staff, says Chip? So these up here, if you want to change these, that's all to do with the layout again. So in engrave mode, you can see where this green box is, and the music frame fits up to it. So that was all the kind of things we looked at last week and how we would use these page templates. So this is the first page template, and you could edit this to set where this box sits, to set where the music sits and everything else as a template, and then that would define all of that. So it's in the Chip, it's in the session on layouts last week. But if you have any more questions about that, then let me know. So fonts and styling, text and music. Let's do the music first. It's a quick option. So if you go to the library menu and music fonts, then in here you've got a bunch of music fonts. So if you want to change the look of or the style, if you like, of the notes themselves, then our standard font is Bravura, so that's what's been used when we imported the file. But if you wanted to change this one, for example, to Finale Maestro, then you can do that. You can update some of the text fonts when you're doing it as well if you want to. So if I press OK, then it's updated this, so it's now using Finale Maestro instead. You might also want to change a couple of things. So, for example, Maestro is a slightly thinner font, so you could maybe get away with tighter note spacing if you wanted to. So in library layout options, in the note spacing, you could potentially, bump this down a bit if you wanted to get tighter note spacing. I'm not quite sure how far we want to go, but let's go to 3.5. So you could, you can get more notes on a page if you wanted to, and that might give you more of the exact look of the original. Let me check how many pages the original was on. Oh, it was on 8 actually. So yes, this probably is now much more similar. So the original ended on page 8 as well. So if you're looking for more an exact look that you had in Finale, then that might be one of the options you want to choose. And what that's done is it's also changed some of these text items as well. But if you wanted to change text items without changing the music, then they would be in the paragraph styles. And the paragraph styles here, they are cascading paragraph styles. So we've got default text is the kind of thing that lots of other things flow from. So default text has been changed to Finale Maestro when I change that music text. if I change default text here, and I change it, for example, to Splentino, which is one of our fonts, and all of the text fonts on your system will be available in this drop-down. But if I change this to Splentino, then it means that everything else, for example, the title, is also the parent of the title is default text. So just changing default text means that all sorts of other items in this list will also change. So when I press OK, you can see it's also changed my titles, it's changed the information over here, it's changed all sorts of bits of text in this project. So if you want to do that, you don't have to do that whilst doing the music font as well, you can just change the paragraph styles. And that also might apply to some things like these. So when you've got some labels or you've got multiple bits of text that you want to all be the same, let me see if there's any more. I don't think there are. No, not in this project, but there might be in the next one. So if you want to change multiple bits of text, you can highlight them both, so select them both. So I've selected one and holding down Command or Control on Windows and select the other, so they're both selected. Now when you right click, you can use a text option to change the paragraph style. So if you've set up a paragraph style that you want to use, then for example, I know instrument change labels, you want to change them to be that, then you can change them to that style and they will both update at the same time. So if there's those kind of things that you want to kind of change lots of bits of text, when it imported, it just imported as a standard bit of text. You can choose them all and change them all en masse using that right click option, text, and change paragraph style. If you don't have a paragraph style, or you want to then change this paragraph style, then you can go to Library Paragraph Styles and you can set up new paragraph styles down here. You can edit all of the ones that are here. So if you want some different padding, because you're now using Splentino and you want to put a bit more padding at the top there, then you can do that here and it will then change all of the bits of text for you. Also, when you're setting up paragraph styles, the last thing in here is if you set up a new option in here and then you press the star button, it will then be available for new projects on your system. So for example, box text doesn't normally exist, I don't think, in Dorico, and I've also got a small italics text that I sometimes use for things. So because I've pressed the star button, it's then available for all new projects I start on this computer, and on this computer I've imported an XML file, so now my extra paragraph styles are there, so they are also all available when I do this right click option and change paragraph style. I can use those much more easily. You can also import and export these text style options if you want to in the library manager. So library manager, if you want to import and export options from other files, you can do that too, so that you get a consistent look. So let me just check some of my other questions or comments about this one. I think that's mostly okay for this one. We could probably move on to the next one. I'll just check the comments. For Kreska's hairpin, does Dorico allow you to control the endpoint note of a dynamic? Yes, you can. You can do that for all sorts of things. So are there any in here that you can see? No, so I'll add a new one. Let's add one here. So let's say on this note here, and let's do it for both of the oboes, we'll say Shift D and we'll say crescendo. So you can see there's some little drag handles at the end. So it says there's one at the beginning and one at the end. If I move this one at the end, then that shows me how far the crescendo now goes. So if this crescendo became a hairpin, then you'd be able to see it here. So you can move these drag handles for the hairpins, or you can do it if it's a bit of crescendo text, because when you choose the text it shows you the end. It's the same shortcuts as well. So Option will move a dynamic around, so it's jumping to the next note. Option on the left and right arrow, or Alt on Windows, and Option Shift, the same way it would extend notes if you were doing note input, you can also extend and contract dynamics with Option Shift left and right, or if you're on Windows, Alt Shift left and right arrows, and that will set the crescendo. In Dorico as well, in the down here, this is our key editor down here. I'm just going to move me again. Down here, there's a velocity option, but there's also a dynamics option. And then the dynamics editor here, so you can see this note here. It's not handy being orange and orange, is it? This note selected here, here's the dynamic. And if I change this dynamic and make it longer here, then it would also change it down here in the dynamics lane as well. You can still adjust it manually here as well without affecting the score if you need to. But you can see it is affecting the playback at that point as well. So yes, absolutely you can do that, and I'll remove those before I forget because they're not supposed to be in this file. I don't think there's any other questions at the moment that I haven't answered, so let's move on. So Shall I put me back on? I don't know. So let's open the next file. So the next one I gave you, if you go to File Open, is this Alan Gen Mixup USA. So I'll import this file, see which instruments are in it. And this file has a few different issues, if you like, or things that we might want to fix. So I'll import this one. So the first probably is, well, I don't know if there is a first. The options we might want to change. It's just loading some sounds. There we go. So we've got massive margin on the left. That's the most obvious thing. Lots and lots of collisions going on here because things aren't fitting. What else have we got? This page is not quite so bad. So we need to figure out what on earth is going on here. Why is this not imported as nicely as some of the other options that we've imported so far? So let's turn the signpost off. Let's turn the flow headers off because it's a default on my system again. This margin on the left. Now the issue with this margin is that these percussion names are really, really long, and that's pushing everything over. So even if we go into layout options and we fix our page margins so that we have 12.69 between the same left and right, we've still got this is now pushing everything outside. And if we tried to put this outside the page, the music frame, there wouldn't be enough space. So we probably would want to double click on these and edit these. So let's say this is percussion 2, woodblock. Let's put these on separate lines. There we go, like that. So that will do that one. And let's just add in some breaks here. There we go. So we imported the text. Oh, it looks like mallets and bells also wants to change. So let's do that one. There we go. So now you can see we've now got a lot less space being used here, which is useful. Now, actually, the percussion will need looking at, I think, anyway. So we'll come back to percussion and look at the instrumentation and everything else for percussion in a minute. But let's check some of these other options as well. So there's a few things going on here. The first is you're very likely to get collisions of things like these because it may be that the ranges were being shown differently. So, for example, the baritone saxophone, but also because they're not transposing. So at the bottom down here, again, if I click on transposed pitch, then at least these notes will now jump into the staff so that they're correct. So it's kind of given us a little bit more space on there. Also, there's more space being used at the top up here than there is in the original. So if I just go to the original file here, you can see there's actually very little space that they're using at the top up here. So it might be that one of the options you want to do, let me just move this one, is to reset the page template, use a different page template. So at the moment in engraved mode, of course, because we've got this project composer box taking up some space before all the music and everything else starts, maybe this needs to move up a bit so that everything fits in here. Maybe you don't need project lyricist as well, for example, so you could then move the music frame up, you could get more space on the page. But of course also, if I go to the score, then this is imported on letter size paper with tiny staves. So in my particular case, actually, maybe I just want to put this on A3 and check a different paper size, a different staff size, and then see if things will fit that way. So I'm gonna, if I was doing, rearranging this, then maybe let me just go down another size. There we go. So if I go to a slightly smaller staff and some bigger paper, then that's also another option. So like I said, it really depends when you're importing things. Are you importing things because you're rearranging things, or do you want it to look exactly the same as the original was? So depending on how you might want to deal with those. Another option also can trip people up sometimes with the clefs and the baritone saxophone and that kind of instrument in particular, is in some scores you might want an instrument to show with a different clef in the score versus the parts. And the problem with importing files as MusicXML is that when you import the instrument, for example, baritone saxophone or bass clarinet, it will import and then we're told what the clef is in the score and it applies that to the score. But because it applies it manually, and you can tell it applies it manually because you can click on it, because in most projects in Dorico that you start, you can't click on the clef, because that's just it's just part of the way the instrument was set up. You don't need to click on it. So if you can click on the clef, and you'll be able to click on all of these, then all of these ideally need to be removed, and you can drag a box like I just did and remove them. But as was pointed out to me by somebody in last week's session, if you press J for the jump bar and you type delete clef, there's a delete initial clefs option. So if you just run that command from the jump bar, it automatically removes all of the clefs looks, and now I can't click on or highlight any of these. And it's just a really useful tip for when you're importing MusicXML files. Just run that command quickly, because somewhere down the road, when you're trying to work out why an instrument is not showing the right clef in the score and the parts, that will save you a whole bunch of time trying to figure something out and what the problem is. If you just delete those initial clefs from the MusicXML import, it will save a lot of time. So yeah, that's a useful option. Now, there's a few other things we want to look at in this project. To start off with, well, there's all sorts of things in this one, but I'm going to look at the instruments next. So the setup mode, it says that we've got a piccolo and we've got flute 1, 2. We've also got 2 instruments here which were clarinets, but the labels have disappeared. And these instruments down here that were the trumpets and the horns, the labels have disappeared. And this is due to the different way that Finale does grouping of names than Dorico does grouping of names and how things work. But also because it really depends now how you want to fix these and how you want to change them, depending on what you're going to print. Because at the moment, for example, for these flutes, it's actually only one flute. Because in the original Finale file, it was one flute on the score, and in the flute part, it was combined flute part. So Dorico's imported the score in the same way, and given you then a combined flute part that it's made. So this, ideally, would probably be 2 flute parts. But if you want to do that in Dorico, then really in setup mode you want to create an extra flute, and you want to copy the notes, for example, underneath and move those to the second flute. It's also not clear in this one, for example, is it one flute playing at the beginning here, or is it both flutes? Because it's not actually labelled either way. So you then want to make some decisions for, these bars, for example. Are you copying them so both flutes are playing, or is it only one flute that's playing and then the second flute only comes in here? So those are the kind of decisions that you'd need to make for the instruments that were previously doubling. And if you sort those out in Dorico so that you have 2 separate flutes, then you would get 2 separate flute parts. And on the score, you could then use the edit condensing option, and it would condense it back to a single flute staff with the 2 flutes on it, but also with the advantage of labelling if it was A2. So you'd get all the proper options and the proper sizes of text and labels and everything else, and you'd get 2 actual flute parts at the end of it, which is probably more useful. And it would then sort out the labelling at the beginning, which would also sort out the labelling for the clarinets when you'd sorted those, and the alto saxophone, and the trumpets and the horns. So it's one of those steps that you just need to be aware of. When you're importing MusicXML, you'll get what was in the original file, but it then depends what you want to do with that. Do you want to separate them out into multiple instruments, or are you happy with a combined file or combined part and how that works? And you might need to change the labelings over here. There is a grouping option if you want it for Dorico, but it doesn't come across. The Finale one doesn't come across in the MusicXML file when we import these, so you want to change these labels. And when you highlight these instruments here, for example, and you click on the 3 dots, if you go to edit names, then it does say it is a clarinet, but the labels are blank because it was being handled by group names instead. So again, you could use the setup mode, and you could use reset instrument names, and that would apply the correct instrument names to things if you wanted to. It really depends how you want to handle these instruments, like I said, and whether or not you want to split these out and everything else. There's also some of the bits of text, like here for the alto saxophone. This one they've actually put in the A2, but it's just come in as a standard staff attached bit of text. So these I would normally leave until I've made the decision about whether I'm splitting out these parts, because these labels, this text, will show me whether or not I should split them out or it should be a solo at that point. And then I just remove those bits of text, because the A2 would be added automatically in a slightly smaller font size that would be correct with this part when you turn on the condensing option in Dorico. So that's one of those things where, because there's quite a difference between how Finale would have handled that and how Dorico handles that, there may be some work, depending on the arrangement you want to do now, to get this in the same style that you had it previously, or to get it in the format that you want now, however you want to describe it, the parts you want now, and to sort those options out. So there are some options I would use in Dorico. For example, there are filter options you can use for top and bottom note. In some cases, I just use the paste explode option. So if you've got a part you were copying, for example, let's take these flutes again. So the first flute part was fine, the first section. These sections here, because there's multiple notes, if you've got 2 flute parts, you can copy all of these notes and press copy. And when you use the paste option and you have another flute staff as well, there's a paste special for explode, and that will then put 1 note on each part for you automatically. It would also do that if you'd use 2 voices. I don't know if there's any voices being used in this file, maybe not. But if you've got 2 rhythms on the same staff, these are all combined, but if you had 2 rhythms on the same staff, then you can select those and use the explode option, and that would do it as well. So there's maybe another session we could do if people are interested in kind of how you would take this type of score and get it into more the Dorico format of having 2 separate flute parts and a combined score, and how you do those ones. So if that's of interest, maybe email me or put a comment in the chat and let me know, and we'll maybe look at doing one of those sessions as well. Let me just check my notes for other things in this bit. Bear with me a second. So while we're looking at various instruments, also at the bottom down here, we've got some percussion. Now, these 2 have been imported correctly. So the snare drum, the bass drum, and everything else have been imported correctly. And actually, if we just have a quick look in setup mode, Dorico, behind my head, Dorico has done these as a percussion instrument here, but when we go to edit percussion kit, you can see it's actually a full drum kit with the snare drum and the bass drum and everything else. So it's imported it into this correct instrument. It's changed the labels at the beginning over here, which is also fine, but we then have the correct bass and snare added. We've got the stem directions that you'd get from a standard kit. You can edit those in the standard way you have in Dorico. But for this instrument down here, this isn't a standard instrument. It's a percussion 2 instrument which contains woodblock, triangle, and crash cymbal, and the first note that was played was crash cymbal. So this one here. So what Dorico has done is imported that as a crash cymbal, but because this isn't an instrument that we have as a default, it means in setup mode, what it's actually done behind... Oh, no, I'm not there, that's okay. What it's actually done here is it's just given us, there's no percussion kit, it's just given us a crash cymbal low, and it's given us 1 crash cymbal low instrument, and it's changed the label on it to say woodblock, triangle, crash cymbal. So it's not really, it's actually just a crash cymbal. So the problem is there's a crash cymbal here, and as you move through the part, it's also a crash cymbal here, and it's also a crash cymbal here, even though it says woodblock, because that's just text. So that kind of percussion part, I suppose in an ideal world, if you had split it out in Finale or in the original program into the separate instruments, Dorico would have imported them as separate instruments, and then you could do what you needed with those. In this particular case, it's not really too bad, but what I would probably do is in setup mode, I would add either a new player or a new instrument to this, and you could then split these out. So you could then, I'd probably do it in the part as well, and I would probably do it in galley view. So you could see the instrument here, you could add in the other instrument underneath that you created, and you can copy and paste these notes into the new instrument, and you could then add in wherever you want those instruments to appear on the staff, top, middle, bottom, in a space, wherever, set the right note heads, all of those kind of things. You could easily do that in the new instrument. And because you're in this part, you'd just be working in some particular sections. I was going to say blocks, but then it's a wood block I'm clicking on. So you could choose all of these notes, for example, and move those to the wood block. You can choose all the triangle notes, and you can move all of those to the triangle. You can, put this one on the crash cymbal, etc., etc. So there would be a little bit of work in some percussion parts, orchestral percussion parts, in getting those to look correct and sound correct, because when you've imported it, only in the XML file, it only said it was 1 instrument and the first note was crash cymbal. So percussion, there may be a bit more sorting out that you need to do with there. Drum kits and those kind of things are fine. And the percussion, again, if they were individual instruments, then I think there'd be no problem there. They would import as separate instruments, and you'd be okay. But that's where, again, Dorico handles instrument changes differently to Finale and Sibelius. It's not a staff type change. It's not an instrument change here. that you've done manually and added some text, Dorico actually knows what those instruments are, and it would create that combined part for you automatically. So you would add the multiple instruments in setup mode and just write for them where you want them, and that would then apply. So again, if that's the kind of thing that you said, could really do with some more information on this, let me know. Either in the chat, I'm just going to put my email address in the chat as well. So if you have questions that you think of after the session, or you want to email me some specific files with information of things, then you can just email me and let me know. Let me just check a couple of the questions in the chat. Ollie says, to import new fonts, you need to go to the library manager. Not quite, no. Depends what you're talking about with fonts. If it's a music font, when you buy the music font, they often have an installer. And so when you install that font on your system, and then you open Dorico, as long as it's a Smoofle font, it will then appear in this list anyway. So that would have a different installer. If it's a text font, then in paragraph styles, it would appear in this text font list. So if you've got a font on your system, it will appear in this list anyway because it's a text font. The point with paragraph styles is that you're not just setting the font, you're also setting the size, various other options, potentially a border, potentially the placement away from the staff and that kind of thing. You're setting all sorts of options in here as a complete paragraph style. And so for those kind of things, you would create a paragraph style so that you can reuse it easily. Because otherwise, every time you've got a bit of text that you add, you have to set all of the options manually. And it's far quicker to just set a paragraph style and on one of the paragraph styles you've chosen. So no, you don't need to import fonts. You either install music fonts on your system, or I guess you install fonts on your system, and then they will appear in Dorico. Dorico uses Smoofle fonts for music, and for text it will use any of the fonts that you have in your system. So hopefully that's correct. But what I said about the library manager is if you've already set up some of those styles in another project, when you go to the library manager, you can drag the other project into this box here, and Dorico will then show you the differences between that project and your current project, and you can then choose, for example, paragraph styles, and you can choose options to import. So I've got some options in my user library, for example, for the box text, or for characters, or for an overline, or for small italics. And if I wanted to import those from my user library on my computer into this project, then I could do that if I needed to. And if you've got another project that you've set up paragraph styles in, drag it into this side, you can then import those settings. So it just saves you, in every project, going to create the same paragraph style, choosing the same font, choosing the same size, choosing the same, everything else. And then you've got it in that project. That's, if you're importing it from somewhere else, or if you're collaborating with somebody else and they've set up some options already in another file, you can just import those settings if you need to. It's just the settings. You'd still need to have the font on your system to make it work anyway, so you'd need to have that same font. It's just the settings for those paragraph styles that you'd be importing. Sean says, is the vertical shifting of some rests in some staves a known issue as regards Dorico XML output? I'm having into MuseScore and reset position to correct before continuing with my workflow. Let me know a particular case. Is it a percussion thing? Is it because you're using voices? I don't think really the MusicXML file normally specifies the exact vertical position of a rest in the XML file. But when you import it, is there an option to say don't import a specific vertical option if it's there? But send me an example or show me an example in a Dorico file, and we can have a look and see what it is. Because when you import it into Dorico, I know it came from Dorico, but if you're importing something into Dorico and you didn't want to import those spacings, then in those preferences we just untick the options and you wouldn't import them. Import into. Like I said, Sean, maybe use that email address, send me an example, let's have a look at that specific case, because it might be something that we can look into for you. Roland says, that being one percussion player that changes instruments, or 3 players. Yes, this is one percussion player with 3 instruments. So actually in setup mode, they've also imported as section players here, and I'm not really sure you'd want them to be section players. I think really you want them to be a single percussionist with multiple instruments. So I would normally, when I add a new percussionist, if you create an empty kit, then you can add in here, you can press the plus button, add in all of the instruments that you want. So you can give one percussionist the multiple instruments, position them on the staff where you want them. So it's one percussion player then, I won't bother with that at the moment, but it's one percussion player then that holds multiple instruments, and Dorico would then do the instrument changes if you wanted them to. You can also get percussion like that one, you can get it to display as a single line staff. So it might be for the crash cymbal you want a single line staff, and then you want an instrument change on the single line staff to say when you want the triangle. Or you might want a 5-line staff and you set them in different positions on a 5-line staff. So there's different ways you can handle percussion with that. So it would depend on what you wanted to do. So we've looked at some of those other options. Just also while we were looking at text and somebody asked about fonts, there's some bits of text up here. So not the tempo, that one's okay. But these other bits of text here, so there's one here for bugle call, and these sections are all labelled with specific bits of text. And they've all been imported, but you can see when I choose one here at the bottom, it just says it's staff attached text. So this option is only now sat in the piccolo part. It doesn't exist in any of the other parts. So there's a couple of things I would do here. The first is these bits of text. To choose them all the way through the project, if you choose one of them, and then you use the option which is Edit Select More, then Dorico will find more of the same kind of item, and it will use those paragraph styles basically to do that. So when I choose this one and I press Select More, and the shortcut is Command-Shift-A or Control-Shift-A on Windows, if I press it once, it selects all the same bit of text on the same page. If I press it again, it selects all of the same text all the way through the flow. So you can see now all those bits of text. I've just pressed the same shortcut, Command-Shift-A twice. It's selected all those same bits of text. So now I want to do two things to these. I want to right-click on them, and I want to go to Text, and I go to Change Text to System Text. So if I do that, then they will all change. So when I just deselect and reselect one, now you can say these are all system attached text. And if I use the same selection option again, I can also right click and I can go to text and change the paragraph style. So if this is the kind of thing where actually you wanted them all to be a specific paragraph style, like, I don't know, the composer? No, that's a bad idea. Have I got one that I want to use? Possibly not. You should probably make a paragraph style before you change them, but I'll use the instrument change labels for now because it's one that exists and it exists with a box. So I've now changed those to all be the same specific style, and they all now are system text. So if I go to a flute part, for example, they all exist in the flute part. There's some things that need changing in this flute part, but actually it's also only one flute part at the moment, not two, so there's all sorts of things that would need changing in this one. And in actual fact, also, what we looked at last week was the collisions. So when you've got these these bits of text, and because they're all quite big and sat on top of each other as well, that's not helping. But the option in engrave mode to avoid collisions, if you turn that off or on, then you can then set the options that you've actually got in here and where your rehearsal marks sit and everything else, and they're all things that we looked at last week. This is a particularly bad case of things that look like they need fixing, but actually it would be quite a quick fix to do to sort out some of the things in this part. So those kind of things but the point is that you need to make them all into system text, because then they do appear in all the parts so that you can then position them correctly. I think some of these probably need to go right slightly to make space for these. Some of these, if they're going to be aligned with the systemic bar line, can be moved automatically anyway. We looked at those last week as well. So yeah, there are other things that you might want to change in this project. So I think the thing here is, when you're importing a file, is kind of understanding what are the things that Dorico is going to be able to do for you automatically, what are the things that you might want to change, and why are you importing the file. If it's to get the same look, then you might want to change some of the fonts to be more similar to Finale. You might want also to have imported those page breaks and system breaks, or frame breaks as we call them, and system breaks to get the same look. And when you've then got the same fonts and you adjust the note spacing, you can get the same look that way. If you're doing this because you want to rearrange things and you want to use our fonts or anything else, then actually don't import so many of those system breaks, because you want to kind of be able to, Dorico to flow the music onto the correct number of pages as you're working. You can, of course, work in galley view when you're working on projects, no problem, so you're not moving up and down all the time in projects with fewer instruments. And also, of course, what do you want to do with these kind of instruments, and do you want to split them out into other instruments? So because I do a lot of that kind of work, I've also in setup mode, when I choose an instrument and you right click, there's a duplicate player option. So if you want a second oboe or this flute part, you want to split it out. To make another one, I can duplicate the player, and I have a shortcut that I've set for that. So I can easily add in extra players and create all the options I want. So like I said, maybe that's another session we could look at some point. Can Dorico mix kit and pitch percussion for one player on a single staff? Yes. And you can also, it will automatically switch if you want between a 5-line staff for pitched and a single line or multiple line staff for percussion if you want it to. Yes, no problem. It's the same as doing any doubling instrument. So you just add in another, when you click this plus button, you add in other instruments into there. In Galley View, you then write for when you want those instruments to appear, and Dorico will automatically sort out all of the instrument changes, no matter what the staff type is, when you're back in page view. Let me just check. Oh yes, there was a couple of other things in this particular file that were different. So one is that Dorico, when it's imported this one in 2.4, the beaming options that you've got are grouping in 4s. And that's because I didn't import the specific options out of the finale file. So in the finale file, you can see here, it's grouping in 2s. So if you tick the box, it would have imported those options. But when you're in Dorico anyway using its own options, you can go to notation options, and you can go to beam grouping, and you can say break beams at beat boundaries, and so it will do that for you automatically. So like I said, even if you've not imported the options out of the finale file, Dorico now can apply its own rules to make that happen. If you'd imported these specific options, then you might have needed to click on something, and for example in the beaming section there is a reset beaming, because then you could reset it back to the Dorico defaults so that it can then apply its own options. But just be aware when you're importing those options from the preferences, which ones you're importing and therefore what's happened. And similarly with note durations, if you'd set a specific note duration for dotted or not or tied or anything else, if you've imported the note durations options, then you'll also find that it will be using this force duration tool, and you'll see that turned on a lot more of the time. I didn't import those options, so I've got all of the standard note lengths, following all of the standard rules that Dorico's applying, or the rules that you've put on your system. So in notation options, if these options are the ones that you want by default, when you press save as default, they'll be the defaults on your system, so you can set them exactly how you want them to be for your next project. There's no other questions on that at the moment. That's good. So we've looked at the clefs. I've done that bit. We've looked at the beam groupings. What other options were there? Yes. Now, one of the things about resetting the staff labels also was that there are a couple of cases, I think, where... No, actually, the staff labels we kind of talked about in this particular case, but there are some things where... I think Dorico might not necessarily have a standard. So if you've written some particular instrument names in Finale or in the program you're coming from, then be careful, because if you're using the setup mode option of reset instrument names, it will reset them all to the Dorico options. And if there are specific names that you wanted out of the original file, then just be aware of those. And see what happens with those. The other thing with instruments was in the original file we imported today, if you still have Eine Kleine Nachtmusik open, this one, in setup mode when it's imported violins and viola as a single player and violoncello as a section player. I'm not sure... Didn't actually check exactly why. It might have been because it originally came in as cello/bass, so we presumed it was more than one player at that point. But if you want to reset these, the best option is to create, for example, a new player here. So we've got an empty-handed player. Just press Escape, and then you can expand this to move the cello into be a single head. So this is now a soloist, the same as these ones, rather than being a section player. And another reason why you might want to do that, or if you're making changes in here, be aware that when you're adding and removing instruments, that Dorico is also doing things for playback. So when you're looking at the playback of all of these kind of things, what Dorico will be doing in play mode is adding in the instruments automatically, but it doesn't tend to remove instruments that you've removed from the project. So if I'd added in some extra instruments into here and then remove them again to go back to strings, in Hallion, you'd potentially still find the other instruments might also be down here and you want to get rid of them. Don't do it manually. You can just go to the play menu and use playback templates. So playback templates are how Dorico works out for each instrument how it should play back. So in Dorico 6.1 that I'm now using, we have an auto playback template, and that will just pick the best sound from all of the available libraries that you've installed on your system that came with Dorico. So there is an option in here, if you click on the edit, to see all of the things it can pick from. So the new etude elements is the new piano, there's a choir, some marching percussion, Iconica Sketch is an orchestral library, so is the Hallin Symphonic Orchestra, and then there's some other sounds which include some other guitars and basses and various other things, and we'll use Groove Agent for drum kits. So that's kind of what Dorico will do, and the priority is set kind of highest to lowest. So that's the order it will choose things. So when it's got two orchestras, it will pick Iconica Sketch first, and then it will pick Hallin Symphonic Orchestra for other items. So that's what it's doing automatically. If you're using Dorico 5 or earlier, then I'll just click on Show All Factory, and you can see there's some other items with factory symbols, and all of the ones in Dorico 5 Pro would have been, for example, these long names with Iconica Sketch, HSO, Hallin Sonic Selection, Olympus, GASE, which is Groove Agent. And so one of these would be your default. So you can just choose that one. When you press apply and close, then Dorico will reload only the available instruments in here. So if you've been adding and removing instruments and you want to just reload the template, because adding extra instruments uses more resources on your computer, and if you want to just free up some of those because you've now only got 4 instruments, that's all you need to write for, then choosing your default template again, whichever one's already chosen, and just press apply and close, it will then reload the instruments. The little green play button will go grey for a second, and then it will reload all the instruments, and when it comes back like this, it's now ready to go, and it will only have loaded in the instruments we need. So now it's unloaded the cello I had, which was a combined section cello, and it's loaded in the solo cello because I changed things in setup mode. So now I've got the individual instruments, and when you go to edit and if necessary click on L1, then it will show you that instrument, the available techniques that are available, and you can choose all of the other instruments and see the options that are available for that instrument. So if you need to reload things, if things aren't quite sounding right for some reason, you want to free up resources, then just go to playback template and reload the same template, just press apply and close, and that's it. When you want to change the sounds to a different library, so if you've got a different orchestral library you want to use, and that might be something like the Finale default sounds, the Garitam Personal Orchestra if you have that installed with Finale. It might be something like Note Performer. It might be something like a Spitfire library or a VSL library or some other third-party library. Then there is a page on our resources section for playback templates. I'll just put this link in the chat. And here we go. There we go. So when you have the when you view that link, you'll get to this playback templates page. It's linked from our resources page as well. And in here there is a table of various playback templates that you can download for some instruments. For some manufacturers. So you can search for one of them in here. So for example, if you search for Finale, then you can download the Finale default sound option, or you can download the GPO5 option. And there's also the Jazz and Big Band option you can download. And if you download those, it gives you a playback template. There's also options for things like Note Performer, which will be in the list here. There's also some of our own Steinberg libraries. There's VSL libraries. So you can choose the option here. Actually, the Note Performer one will direct you to their website, because when you install Note Performer, you get the playback template installed automatically. But for anything else, for example, for those Finale options, When you then go to play and playback template, you can then import the library that you've downloaded. When you download it, there's some information in that file that tells you how to import the library and what it does and that kind of thing. But basically, in here, you go to import, you click on the import button, and you add it in, and you'll get another option in here. So this is why I've got so many in here. These are the Spitfire ones, so the BBC SO Spitfire ones. So when you look at the Spitfire option here, so here's the Note Performer website if you're interested in that one. There's a trial as well. There's the Spitfire Symphony Orchestra from BBC SO. So you can download a template for those, and they appear in this library. And then all you need to do is just choose the option you want and press apply and close, and it will use that library instead. So if I go, for example, for GPO5 and press apply and close, then the little green button will disappear again. It's loaded in all of the GPO5 solo options, because these are solo instruments again in this particular case that I'd reset them to. And then when it's finished loading, we'll get a green play button again up here. So now it's ready to go, and when you click on the little E button here to show any of the particular instruments, it's now loading the aria player, and it's loaded in the violin key switch, and so it's also loaded the expression map that's needed. So when you look at a particular instrument, the expression map is needed so that all of the techniques for things like staccato or spiccato, if it's available, or legatos, all of those kind of things are also all automatic now and will be included for that instrument. If you want to choose a different library, so let's have another one as an example. Let's have Note Performer in here. So if I press apply and close, then the little green play button will disappear again just for a second. It will reload Note Performer instead, and you get a green play button, and now it's loaded the Note Performer playback template, and it's loaded all of the expression maps for each instrument in here. So when you click on the little E, then it loads Note Performer instead with all the solo violins and violas and cellos in here. So then this file will now play back with Note Performer instead, so you don't have to do anything other than press P, and it will then play back with that library instead. So if it's available in one of those options, in one of those downloads, then switching to a different template is very easy, because you just import the template, choose it, and it will automatically load everything. There are options for many manufacturers in here, but if you can't find one in here, then there's also links to our forum post about some of the templates, and you can also ask other people on our forum, because if they've already started something or got some of the details, then they'll often share those with you via the forum anyway. But lots of the options are here. So if you're doing this one, for example, is if you're doing the tap space VDL, then a company called ScoreSource have done a playback template for that one. Like I said, there's some of our ones in here as well. There's some Spitfire ones, there's some Orchestral Tools one. There's a Berkeley library that Orchestral Tools have done. There's some Native Instruments ones. This one is a Native Instruments free choir that you can use that Jacob Collier did. And there's all sorts of other ones in here. The playback templates themselves are all free. You do need to, of course, buy the library that they go with. So to use the Note Performer one or to use the GPO5 one, you need to have bought that library from those companies and installed it. The playback template just lets Dorico use that library that you've already bought if you own it. And it's just a much quicker way than going through each instrument and having to load all of those things manually like you might do in a DAW. Can you have a different template for each instrument? You can. So in the playback template section, in here you can choose various things. So for example, there was one I was doing earlier. You can mix and match. There's a Note Performer one that I started with, but when I edit this one, in here I've got our auto template and then Note Performer. So in the auto template, I'm using the auto template for any singers, and I'm using it for the piano specifically and the drum set. But everything else is going from Note Performer. So you can set up your specific options to say, I want the brass from this library, but I want the solo trumpet from a different library. I want the woodwinds from a different library completely. I want the strings from this other library over here. And you can set up your own playback template that can handle all of those. You can set them up manually. In play mode, you can come in here and you can add in other items into the VST rack manually. You can assign in the track inspector one of these instruments manually to something else if you want to. But it's much quicker if you can just set up a playback template for those. There is also a video series that my colleague Anthony has done on playback templates with a lot more detail about how to set them up if you want to do that kind of thing as well. So on our YouTube channel that you're on, if you click on the little D icon underneath this video, there's a playback templates series that he's done of just some short videos about how you would set those up and what you would do if you want to completely make your own. But for any of the ones that exist already, you can download them from this page and download those and use those and combine any of these together very easily in the playback templates page. Somebody asked about a link to tutorials. Let me see if I can find that quickly for you then. So on the YouTube page for Dorico, here, this is the live one we're on now. Here is the playback templates one. Hello, Anthony. So I'll just put this link to these videos in the chat. So if you want that playback template series, then they are in there as well. Does Musio have playback templates? They don't, although the Musio stuff I think is often individual instruments, isn't it? So we could do some individual instruments from Musio. I do now have some details from them. So yes, they are something that we could potentially add, but I would check on the forum first to see if anybody else has already done a playback template for those. There is also from... there is the Babylon Waves art conductor option, and that is a series of expression maps, a lot of expression maps, thousands of expression maps that they've done, but they would need building into a playback template to actually use them quickly in Dorico. So you can buy from them the expression maps, which is all the mappings of how does the violin in this particular library switch to staccato and legato and everything else. And you can add those in if you want to as specific manual settings, and you can then make your own playback template from them if you want to, but they're expression maps that you buy are not a complete playback template out of the box. So but I know that they include some Musio options, so if you want a head start on the Musio stuff but you don't and if the forum can't help you with any of the details, then yes, maybe the Babylon Waves option for Dorico can help you. I will put a link actually on our playback templates page for that as well. So, but if I haven't done it yet and you can't find it, email me. My email is in the chat. I can see it just there in the chat. So email me and let me know. Just scrolling back through the questions, there's quite a few. I think I've answered them all so far on those. So let me know if there's any other questions on that. So we've covered kind of, some of the playback stuff, and that's also important because when you've imported these instruments, you might find if an instrument's come in with an odd name that Dorico didn't know exactly what it was. So sometimes using the change instrument option here can also be useful to actually change it to be the instrument you want it to be. And the reason for that is that when Dorico then assigns the playback to it, it can assign the right instrument. Because otherwise, if it's not quite sure what it was, you might just get a piano sound or something for it instead, or something else. And that can also sometimes be highlighted when you go to setup and you go to reset instrument names. Because if Dorico isn't sure what it is, it might just put it on a treble staff. With the default sound. So those kind of things, it might be useful to use the change instrument option to specifically set an instrument for that, and transposition and clef and sound, so that then you can go to play and playback template, and it will automatically reload the correct sound for that instrument that you've now changed to. So yeah, resetting the playback template I often use once I've actually decided what all the instrumentation is and everything else, and especially if I've removed some things. Reload the playback template, it only loads the instruments that you actually want. And it also means then that in the mixer you get the instruments in the right order, because if you've added and removed instruments as you've been going, then they might not be in the exact correct order that you wanted, but just resetting the playback template will also change that order in the mixer for you so that it is correct. Please think about doing a session on voices. Well, there are already some videos from my colleague Anthony on voices, how to use them, how to set them up, and that kind of thing. So there is a video on it, but yes, if that doesn't cover it, then do let me know. If you want to drop me an email, I can send you a link to that if you can't find it on our channel. But my tip for our channel is, there it is. On our channel, when you click on the Dorico icon here and you're on our channel, I'm just going to close Anthony. Sorry, Anthony. There's a little search button here. And if you search this, for example, for voices, it's only searching our channel. So how to work with voices, or actually this one, things like inputting into a different voice can be really useful to look at those kind of things, to look at how to make things work. And also from our homepage, there's this input tutorials. And all of these, hello Anthony, all of these have lots of different options for kind of how to build things up step by step. And this is also the one that the voices section is in. So there's all sorts of things in here. So inputting into a different voice is one of those specific videos. So I'll just put that one in the chat for you as well. But yes, if you can't find if you can't find all the information you need for that one, and if you have some specific cases where you want to use voices, then do let me know. But I think in Dorico you probably use voices less than in other programs because we have the condensing option. So because when you're doing things like this file, when you're setting up the saxophones and these horns, we wouldn't normally use voices for this. We would use the condensing feature for this. So we would write for 2 separate horns and then have Dorico condense them automatically, but we wouldn't be using voices at that point. So the only thing you really use voices for in Dorico is instruments like piano and guitar, because they actually do have different rhythms going on the same staff for one specific instrument. We don't even use voices when we're doing percussion, because when you do percussion and drum kits like this, the stem directions and everything else are all handled automatically by the behind my head, by the drum kit editor, this percussion kit. When you choose a snare drum, it stems up, and a kick drum, it stems down. So we don't actually use the voices feature actually for that either. But if there are specific cases that, for example, like I said, piano and guitar music, and you want to talk about voices, or slashes are often also a slash voice, please do let me know and we can look at that for you, no problem. Let me have a look. The questions is XML output from Dorico a work in progress? Pulling exported XML leads to consistent messes. Well, send me some examples. Let's have a look. There are also some options for XML export from Dorico. So when you're in the XML section, there is an export thing, and there are some options in here. But no, we do try and be very good with our XML export as well. But my other question would be, what are you importing it into? Is it our export that's an issue, or is it the import into the other program that's an issue? So we can certainly look at that. Send me some examples. Quite happy to look at those. And if there are cases that aren't quite working, then we can certainly look at those for you as well. It's often the kind of thing where when we do a new update of Dorico, and we did one this week, in the version history, it's sometimes added in, oh, by the way, we've also changed these things in either our import or our export, but they're not always necessarily highlighted. But if you do have questions or problems with some of those, yes, please do send me a file, let me know. Oh, and you've then said, looking forward to working this out in email. Fantastic. I don't think there's any other questions, so I think then we're probably happy on at least these bits. So what I'd like to know is, the one thing I didn't do in this one, look, I didn't reset all the brackets in this file. Nobody pointed it out. So layout options, and brackets and braces, orchestral, go. And now we have all the correct brackets and braces for this file as well. There we go. So yes, if there's other things in your particular XML import that isn't working, hopefully this has at least given you an idea of kind of what you should be expecting. And what I would also like to know is, when you've imported the file, what are you then looking to do? Have you imported it? Make sure you've imported it, as a recap, you're with the correct options here. Often, if you're going to be rewriting lots of things, doing a new arrangement, don't tick lots of these options. Let Dorico apply its own options, because it's going to be probably quicker in the end to then generate what you need. If you're looking to do something that's very, very similar look to Finale, including the paper size, the exact staff size, the exact number of bars on a page, maybe there are some of these things you want to import. But be aware that when you import it into Dorico, by default, you're using a different font. Both for text and music, so you might need to change those options. You might need to change the note spacing to make things, look more correct, or anything else. So there are still some things that Dorico will be applying. But if you have any issues, then please do let us know, and we can help you through some of those as well. If there are other useful sessions on things like splitting out these instruments to be, individual instruments, because that's the kind of thing you're doing. You had an original combined file in Finale, you want to split them out. That might be another session we do. Or maybe when you've imported it, you have all of these instruments, but you now want to say, the thing I've never been able to do before is make a short score, a combined score. You can use our condensing option for that. You can just turn on condensing, but maybe you want to know more about condensing. So yeah, please do let us know. So I hope that you found these Masterclass series useful. So we've done some note input things, and you can set the options that you want, whether you want it to be very like Finale, using our default options and all of those kind of things, and insert mode and all the other things we looked at. We then looked at doing an arrangement in session 2. We then looked at some of the layout options, so setting how the page is set up, the template is set up, how to move bars and things between various pages and all that kind of thing. We did that last week. And now kind of importing projects and also some playback things so that you can set things to be the library that you want to use for playback. So hopefully that's given you a good overview. So now the question is, what should we do in our next live streams? There are on our channel probably at least 50 or 60 live streams that we've done on all sorts of topics. So like I said, in our YouTube channel, click on that little search option and have a look in there, or look through the options we already have. So for example, on our channel, the search option is really useful. But there's also, we've categorized the live streams that we've done. So here's the Dorico 6 ones, there's some Dorico 5 ones, and there's all sorts of live streams we've done on all sorts of different options. So entering a symphony, or building a big band, or there's someone we've done on previous ones on layout and all sorts of things. But if you can't find something you're looking for, please do email and let me know. And we'll look at them when we do our next live streams, which we're often at this time on a Wednesday. And then we'll look at doing some of those and what the other options we could do to help you out with your projects. Somebody said I need to go back to all your available sessions. Maybe don't watch all 50, 60 of them, but yes. Will you be going back to Discover Dorico sessions? Yes, I think we will. So the question is, what will we do next? But yes, I think we'll probably go back to the monthly Discover Dorico sessions, I think. But that probably also depends on the feedback we get from you as to what you found most useful and what the next step is. Actually, do you need more information on some of the things we've already covered, or are there other features now that you want to be looking at? So is it proofreading or cues or condensing, like I said, or something else? Is it more playback things? So yes, please do let me know either on email or in the comments on this, and let's see what we do next. So let me just check the chat again. Whoopee. Let's hope that was I think that was after talking about the sessions, so that's good, the Discover sessions. If you're not aware, then the Discover Dorico sessions are all of, we tend to do them monthly, or roughly monthly, and we tend to do them on a Wednesday at about this time. So it was 4:00 in the UK, and we'd kind of cover different topics each month as to what we wanted to look at, but often it was just from feedback that people had given us on questions they had and situations. So also a thumbs up to have Jason Alfredo make videos. Yes, so Jason's videos are fantastic. His videos, let me see, have I got a link in here? No, I'll find them on our channel here. So we have some videos now, here they go, from that Jason Alfredo's done. Let's click on one of these. And there's a series of these which are now conquering the transition with Jason Alfredo. And what he does is he compares and often puts Finale side by side with Dorico to explain in a Finale way, if you like, here's where those options are that you're looking for. So on the first videos he does, these are some of the right mode ones and later on, but in some of the first videos he really does compare and have them kind of side by side and say, these are the options you're used to finding and here's where they now exist. So that can be very useful for people, certainly. And yeah, he's fantastic at doing those videos. So I'm glad they were useful, Sean. In the next live stream, Oktoberfest polkas while enjoying a pint. Well, Oktoberfest already started at the end of September, so maybe we've missed one. So, but yes, maybe that's what we need to do. I think actually, I know my colleague Marcus has done some polkas in some of his German ones, and because on YouTube you can now watch the German videos as well and just choose the language option at the bottom, then it also will you can hear it in English if you want to do that as well, which is interesting for me because I know what Marcus actually sounds like, but yes, it's obviously a YouTube voice that's playing you at that point. So yes, I'm glad you found those useful, and also Jason Alfredo's videos as well. So yes, there's lots of resources available. If there's something you can't find, please do let us know. We're available in all sorts of things, with the Facebook groups, the forum. You've got my email address in this chat. You can write to us on YouTube, although on YouTube you can't put images and send us things very much. So it's probably easier if you use, for example, the forum and get in touch with us that way, and you can send us any issues you have or examples or that kind of thing. So yes, I thank you for joining these sessions live as well, because the questions have been very useful in directing what we do in these sessions and how we do them. So thank you for joining these live. It will be available to watch whenever you need it. We'll leave these sessions up now so you can recap these and go over them and anything else. And yes, let me know if there's other things that you want to look at. Somebody's just said or MIDI import, but they started this with or. So, but maybe we need to do a session on MIDI import. I suppose I should say if you're using Cubase 14, you don't need to anymore because you can export a Dorico file from Cubase. But yes, if you're using another DAW, then yes, you might want to do MIDI import. You're not likely to do it from Finale or from another notation program because MusicXML will have more useful information. But maybe if you're doing it from a DAW, then we could do a session. There are some sessions I've already done on. One of them is called DAW to Score, so DAW type of DAW to Score, and that's all about MIDI import. It uses Dorico 5, and we look at the MIDI import dialog and how you could use that to import things. So have a look for that session. Like I said, if you can't find it, let me know. Just email me and I'll send you some details for that one as well. So yes, there's a couple of people there talking about importing things. So yes, there is already a session called DAW to Score. Imports from Cubase to Dorico via XML or MIDI import. If you've spent any time in the score editor, you can just export a Dorico file now from Cubase. So you don't actually need to use MIDI or MusicXML. You can just export a Dorico file. If you're using Logic or another DAW, then it depends. If you've spent any time adding things like dynamics in their score editor, you probably want to use MusicXML. But if you haven't spent any time in their score editor, then maybe using MIDI is the best option. And if you've just been spending a lot of time in a DAW playing things into lots of tracks, then the MIDI import dialog that we have in Dorico is much better at sorting out those tracks as you import things. And the DAW to Score session will tell you a lot more about that. But please do let me know if there's something that we haven't covered. Is there a glossary anywhere in Dorico documentation? Yes, there is. It's on Steinberg.help. But it depends on what kind of glossary you're looking for as to whether it's. You can search in the glossary and search in the help and it will find lots of things for you, and it will tell you at the beginning kind of what lots of those terms and things mean as well. So yes, that kind of information is there as well. But it might be that you find Jason's videos useful because Jason Alfredo, because he also explains kind of this is what it was called in Finale and this is where you find it and what it's called in Dorico. And that may also be a useful option. So as I said, thank you for joining this session live. Please let me know if you've got any questions or comments in any of the options you've got for getting in touch with us. Like I said, the forum, Facebook, on here, email, wherever. And yes, keep in touch. And let us know what you're doing with your projects and what you would like us to cover in these sessions next time. So thank you very much. See you next time.